Humanity's first encounter with the alien race took place on a forgotten world, deep in the corner of the galaxy. This planet, once a thriving hub of life and culture, was now a desolate wasteland. The once proud civilization had been abandoned by the stars, shunned by the very beings they had once called their allies. The once glorious cities were now ruins, the people broken and scattered. Kale, a human explorer, had been chosen for a mission unlike any other. He was sent to investigate a distress signal that had been faintly detected coming from the planet's surface. It was a call for help, but who would answer it? The alien race that had sent the signal had been cast aside by the galaxy, their name erased from records, their existence nearly forgotten. As Cal's spacecraft descended through the atmosphere, the bleak landscape came into view. The once green fields now lay barren, and the buildings that once gleamed with life were now hollow shells of their former selves. There was no sign of any immediate danger, just the overwhelming feeling of abandonment. He landed near the ruins of what appeared to be an ancient city. The air was thick with dust, and the ground cracked and dry beneath his boots. As Cal stepped out of his ship, he felt the weight of the history around him. This was a world that had seen glory and now only knew sorrow. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a member of the alien race, tall, with smooth green skin and a regal posture, but their once proud face now showed signs of years of hardship. The alien looked up at Kel, eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Kel slowly approached, not wanting to make any sudden movements. "I am Kale, from Earth," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I received your signal. I'm here to help." The alien's eyes narrowed. Help. The word sounded foreign on their lips, as if they hadn't heard it in centuries. "Why would you? A human, helpless. We have been abandoned by the stars. No one comes here. No one cares." Cal's heart tightened. He had heard stories of races that had been discarded by the Galactic Council, but seeing the effects firsthand was different. "I believe in helping those in need," Cal said. "The galaxy may have forgotten you, but humanity has not. We are here, and we will do what we can to help rebuild." The alien looked at him, searching his face for signs of deceit, but there were none. For the first time in years, a small spark of hope flickered in the alien's eyes. They were not alone. Maybe, just maybe, they had found someone who would not turn away. We have lost so much," the alien said softly. "What is it you can offer us?" Kale paused, choosing his words carefully. "We may be new to this part of the galaxy, but humanity has always thrived on helping others. We can offer food, medical supplies, and technology. Together, we can rebuild your world." The alien's gaze softened, and for a moment, Kale thought they might speak again. But instead, the alien simply nodded and turned, leading Kale toward what remained of their city. This was the beginning, the first step in a long journey. Kale knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he had made his choice. He would not let this alien race fall into oblivion. As they walked through the ruins, Kale couldn't help but think that this might be humanity's greatest chance to prove that, no matter what the galaxy thought, humans always believed in second chances. The alien's name was Zyner, and his once grand city stood in ruins around them. As he led Kel deeper into the remains of his people's former home, Kel could see the weight of countless years of sorrow etched on Zyner's face. The buildings, though crumbling, still held a sense of forgotten beauty, and the streets that once bustled with life were now empty. It was as if the very heart of this planet had stopped beating. "I never thought I'd see another living soul from beyond our world," Zyner said quietly, his voice rough from years of silence. He glanced over his shoulder at Cal, still unsure of whether he should trust the human or not. "Why have you come?" "Your people. They don't care about us. Why would you?" Cal hesitated for a moment. The question was sharp, and Cal knew the answer would not be simple. He understood the pain in Zyner's voice. He had heard stories of the alien race's fall from grace, their abandonment by the other galactic races that once called them allies. But he had seen enough suffering in the universe to know that it was never too late for help. Humanity has always believed in helping those in need, Kale said, his voice steady. You were forgotten by the galaxy, but we haven't forgotten you. I'm here to offer whatever aid we can, be it food, medical supplies, or even technology, to help rebuild. Xenor stopped in his tracks and turned to face Kale. There was disbelief in his eyes, mixed with a flicker of something Kale couldn't quite place. For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of Xenor's words hanging in the air. You don't understand, Xenor said, his voice cracking slightly. We were once proud. Our people were strong, respected. But then, one by one, the other races turned their backs on us. They saw us as weak, as a failure. No one wanted to help us. We were left to die here. Kale could hear the bitterness in Xenor's voice. But he also saw something else, a desperate longing for a future, for something more than endless isolation. It was a pain that Kale knew all too well from humanity's own history. Sometimes, all it took was one hand extended in kindness to break through the walls of despair. I understand more than you think, Kale said quietly. Humanity has faced its own struggles. We've made mistakes too. But what we've learned is that we're stronger when we help each other. If you'll allow it, we'll help you rebuild. Xenor's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, he seemed to consider Kel's words. It was clear that the alien leader had lived in distrust for so long that he wasn't sure if he could even trust someone offering help. But something in Kel's sincerity seemed to reach him. Why would you do this for us? Xenor asked, still doubtful. Why us, of all races? Kale smiled, a warm but simple smile. Because that's what humans do. We believe in second chances, and sometimes, the ones who need help the most are the ones who can rise again. Xenor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze lingering on Kale, as if searching for any sign of trickery. Finally, he sighed, a mix of hope and fear in his expression. Perhaps we've been wrong, Xenor said softly. Maybe we haven't been completely abandoned after all. With that, Xenor led Kale deeper into the ruins, where a handful of his people still survived. Kale's heart was heavy with the weight of the task ahead. Rebuilding a broken people wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. This was only the beginning. Kale returned to Earth with a heavy heart. He had seen the devastation on the alien world and heard the despair in Xenor's voice. The alien race had been abandoned, left to die in a corner of the galaxy, forgotten by the very stars they once called allies. But Kale couldn't turn his back on them. He believed in second chances, and he had promised Xenor that humanity would help rebuild. Now, back on Earth, Kale had to convince the Council of Galactic Nations to support his mission. The council was made up of representatives from dozens of powerful races, and their decision would determine whether humanity could continue its efforts to help the discarded alien species. But Kale knew that the other races were not so eager to get involved. The discarded aliens were seen as a lost cause, a race that had failed their own people and the galaxy. The council chambers were vast, filled with the murmur of voices and the rustling of robes and uniforms. Kale stood before them, his heart pounding in his chest. The members of the council were seated in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on him. Some appeared curious, others skeptical, but all were wary. Kale, we understand that you've encountered this alien race, began Ambassador Tara, a tall, slender being with translucent skin and glowing eyes. But why do you think humanity should involve itself in their fate? They were abandoned for a reason. Kale took a deep breath and began his speech. I understand the doubts you have, but I believe that every race deserves a chance to rebuild, even if they've made mistakes. The aliens I met are not what you think. They are a proud people who have been broken, but they are not beyond saving. Humanity has always stood for helping others, for offering a second chance. We can provide them with the resources, knowledge, and technology they need to rebuild their world. The council members exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Kel could see the resistance in their eyes. They were not moved by his words. Some of them had long ago decided that the alien race was a lost cause, and they weren't willing to risk their resources on a group of people who had failed so spectacularly. Humanity is known for its resilience, Kel, said Ambassador Varn, a hulking alien with bumpy skin and multiple eyes. But this is a political matter. If we support these aliens, we risk angering other galactic factions. It could lead to instability. Kel nodded, understanding the argument. I know the risks. But if we do nothing, what message does that send? That we're willing to let an entire race perish just because they've been abandoned. That's not the future I want for humanity. I want us to be the ones who stand up and show the galaxy that compassion is stronger than politics. There was a long silence. Kel could feel the weight of their judgment upon him. The room was tense, and he could sense the council's reluctance. He had made his case, but would it be enough? Finally, the chair of the council, a wise old being known as Elder Kizari, spoke up. You speak with conviction, Kel. But the council must consider the broader implications. The decision is not just about one race, but about the future of the galaxy. If we choose to aid them, we must prepare for the consequences. Kel's heart sank. It wasn't a refusal, but it wasn't a victory either. The council had decided to take more time to deliberate. Kel knew the odds were stacked against him, but he refused to give up. Please, Kel said, his voice filled with determination. Give them a chance. They deserve that much. Elder Kizari looked at Kel for a long moment, her ancient eyes reflecting both wisdom and doubt. Finally, she nodded slowly. We will consider your request, Kel. But understand this, your actions will have consequences. We will not take this decision lightly. As Kel left the chamber, his mind raced. The fight was far from over, but he had done what he could. Now he would wait, hoping that the council would choose compassion over caution. The future of an entire alien race, and his own mission, depended on it. Kel spent the following weeks in a restless state, waiting for the council's decision. Every day, he sat in his small office on Earth, watching the skies, hoping for any sign that the galactic nations would relent and approve his request. He knew he had made a strong case, but he also knew how deeply politics ran in the galaxy. The other races weren't interested in helping a discarded species. They saw it as a waste of resources. Yet, something kept Kel going, a quiet, persistent belief that humanity was different. He had witnessed the pain and suffering of the alien race, and he couldn't turn his back on them. He had promised Zinner, the alien leader, that humanity would help, and Kel intended to keep that promise, no matter the odds. One evening, as Kel was reviewing the latest communications from the council, a message arrived from an unexpected source. It was from an alien race known as the Dantorians, a species known for their immense intelligence and advanced technology. They were not part of the galactic nations, but they were well respected across the galaxy for their neutrality and wisdom. Kel opened the message, his heart pounding with curiosity. The Dantorians had never shown interest in helping others in such a direct way. Their message was brief but clear. Human Kel, we have been watching your efforts. We believe that your race's actions could serve as an example to the galaxy. We wish to assist in your mission. The discarded aliens deserve a chance at redemption, and we are willing to provide support. Kel stared at the screen, disbelief slowly turning into hope. The Dantorians, of all people, were offering their help. This was unexpected, and it could change everything. The Dantorians were known for their powerful technology, and their support could turn the tide in Kel's favor. But why would they help? The Dantorians had no reason to get involved, especially not with a race that had been abandoned by the galaxy. As Kel read the message again, he realized the significance. The Dantorians weren't offering help because it was politically advantageous. They were offering help because they believed in the same ideals that Cal did. They saw something in humanity's willingness to help the discarded alien race, and they were willing to take a stand, even if it meant going against the Council's wishes. The message continued. We will provide you with advanced energy technology and resources to assist in rebuilding. Use them wisely. We do not seek recognition, but we wish for the galaxy to see that compassion is not a weakness. Kale immediately contacted Zinner, eager to share the news. When the alien leader received the message, his expression was a mixture of shock and disbelief. He had never expected anyone, let alone the Dantorians, to step forward and help. I don't know what to say, Zinner replied, his voice thick with emotion. After everything we've been through, I never thought anyone would offer us a chance. But this is more than we could have ever hoped for. Kale smiled, feeling the surge of relief. The Dantorians' help wasn't just a lifeline for the aliens. It was a sign that the galaxy wasn't as cold and unforgiving as it appeared. There were still those who believed in the power of compassion and redemption. Now we have a real chance, Kale said. But we must be careful. We have to rebuild their world, and we need to prove to the galaxy that we can succeed. Zinner nodded. We will work together. We will prove that we are worthy of this chance. With the Dantorians' resources now at their disposal, Cal and Zinner began to plan the next steps. The alien race, once discarded and forgotten, now had a hope for the future. And with humanity's help, they would rise again. The road ahead would not be easy, but Cal knew they were no longer alone. The Dantorians, and now humanity, stood by their side. Cal looked out the window of his office, feeling a quiet sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the stars would shine a little brighter for them after all. With the support of the Dantorians, Cal and Zinner worked tirelessly to rebuild the shattered alien world. The Dantorians' advanced energy technology provided a new source of power, enough to bring life back to the planet's barren fields and decaying cities. Cal watched in awe as the alien race, with the right tools, slowly began to rebuild. It was a sight he would never forget, a people who had once been abandoned, now rising from the ashes. But the journey was far from easy. The alien population was divided. Some embraced the new hope Cal and Zinner offered, eager to rebuild their civilization with the help of humanity. Others, however, were filled with doubt, unwilling to trust the very races that had turned their backs on them. There were those who clung to the old ways, to their pride, and who rejected the idea of rebuilding with outside help. Zinner, as the leader, found himself in a difficult position. His people had been hurt by the galaxy's rejection, and now they were struggling to find their place in a world that had once rejected them. The younger generation, those who hadn't known the glory of their past, were eager to rebuild and learn from Cal. But the older generations, the ones who had lived through the betrayal, resisted the changes. They were afraid of losing their identity, of becoming something less than what they had been before. Cal could see the tension in Zinner's eyes as he tried to calm his people. He knew that Zinner wanted to unite them, but the scars of the past were deep. Cal had hoped that the promise of a brighter future would be enough to unite them, but it wasn't. Trust would take time, and the road ahead would be difficult. There's a growing division among our people, Zinner said one evening, as the two of them stood in the center of what was once a grand city. Some want to accept the help, but others believe it's a sign of weakness. They want to rebuild on their own terms. Cal nodded. He understood the struggle. He had seen it before in humanity's own history, how pride and fear could tear a society apart. It's going to take time, Zinner. The young ones see the promise of a new world, but the older ones only see the betrayal. It's not an easy thing to forgive. Zinner sighed, running a hand through his hair. I fear that we may lose everything before we've had a chance to rebuild. Cal placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll help them see. We have to show them that the future is worth fighting for. Together, Cal and Zinner began to travel across the planet, speaking to the different factions of the alien race. They explained the benefits of accepting help from humanity and the Dantorians. They spoke of the future, of the possibilities that lay ahead if they could come together. It wasn't easy, and there were many who resisted. But slowly, the younger generation began to stand with Kale and Zunner, while some of the older leaders started to soften their stance. It was a long and difficult process, filled with setbacks and challenges. There were moments when Kale felt like giving up, when it seemed like the fractures between the different factions were too wide to heal. But each time he saw the hope in the eyes of the young aliens, he remembered why he was here. He had promised Zunner, and he had promised himself that they would not let this alien race fall into oblivion. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Kale felt that they were making progress. There was hope on the horizon, and even if it was small, it was enough to keep pushing forward. Together, humanity and the alien race would rebuild what had been lost. And in time, they would become a symbol of what could be achieved when people put aside their differences and worked toward a common goal. As the days passed, Cal's optimism about the rebuilding efforts began to grow. The alien race, once divided, was slowly starting to unite. The younger generation, full of hope and energy, worked tirelessly with Kale and Zunner, eager to rebuild their cities and their future. The older generation, though still hesitant, started to soften, realizing that change might be their only chance for survival. But just as things seemed to be improving, a new problem arose, one Kel had not anticipated. It started with small incidents. Food supplies disappeared overnight, equipment was found sabotaged, and buildings under construction were mysteriously damaged. At first, Kale thought it was a series of accidents, or perhaps the work of a few disgruntled individuals who didn't trust the outsiders. But soon, the pattern was too clear to ignore. Someone, or something, was deliberately undermining their efforts. Zunner noticed it too. The once trusting leader began to grow paranoid, watching the construction workers and even his own people with suspicion. "Who would do this?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Why would anyone sabotage the work we're doing?" Kale shook his head. "I don't know, but this is more than just petty rebellion. Someone wants to stop us. They don't want this planet to heal." The two of them spent nights trying to find answers. They inspected the damaged areas and reviewed security footage. What they found shocked them. There were no clear perpetrators. No one could be identified. But the sabotage seemed too coordinated, too precise, to be the work of random individuals. It was as if someone knew exactly where to strike to cause the most disruption. One evening, after another setback, Kale and Zunner met in the city's makeshift command center, a once proud hall now filled with maps and plans for the rebuilding effort. "We need to find out who's behind this," Kale said, frustration creeping into his voice. "If we don't, we'll lose everything we've worked for." "I've been thinking the same," Zunner replied. "There are a few groups among my people who still resist, but this doesn't feel like them. This feels like someone else. Someone from outside our world." Cal's eyes widened. "You think someone else is behind this, an outside force?" Zunner nodded slowly. "It's possible. We've been isolated for so long, but we still have enemies in the galaxy. Maybe they don't want to see us rise again." Kale clenched his fists. He had known that there were those who would oppose the idea of the discarded alien race getting a second chance, but he had never imagined that they would go this far to sabotage the efforts. Someone wanted to keep the alien race weak, and that someone wasn't going to let them rebuild without a fight. They didn't have much time. If the sabotage continued, they would lose the momentum they had gained. Kale knew they needed help. Someone with the resources to investigate the sabotage and find out who was behind it. That night, Kale reached out to the Dantorians, hoping they could lend their advanced technology to uncover the hidden enemies. Within hours, a response came. "We have already detected suspicious activity near your location," the Dantorian message read. "It seems the interference is coming from a faction outside your planet's atmosphere. We will assist you." Kale breathed a sigh of relief. The Dantorians' help would give them the upper hand. But even with their advanced technology, the fight was far from over. There were enemies lurking in the shadows, trying to stop the alien race from rising again. Kale knew they had to act fast. They had already come too far to let these hidden enemies tear apart everything they had worked for. As the investigation began, Cal's resolve grew stronger. No matter who was behind the sabotage, he would fight to protect the hope they had built. Together, humanity and the alien race would stand against the forces that sought to keep them in the dark. The days that followed were tense. Kale and Zinner stood side by side as they watched the Dantorians' technology uncover the source of the sabotage. It didn't take long for them to trace the signal back to a hidden faction, one that Kale had feared existed but had hoped wouldn't interfere. The faction responsible was a group of old enemies from the Galactic Council, a race known as the Varelli. The Varelli were a ruthless, highly advanced species that had always resented the idea of the discarded alien race rising again. They saw the alien species as weak, a reminder of their past failures, and they had done everything in their power to ensure they stayed in the shadows. "They don't want us to succeed," Zinner said quietly as he read through the reports from the Dantorians. His face was hard, filled with both anger and disbelief. "They would rather see us destroyed than let us rebuild." Kale clenched his fists. He had known this would happen. There would always be those who feared change, who resented seeing the underdog rise. But now that the truth was out, he knew they couldn't back down. "We've come too far to let them stop us now," Kale said with determination. The Dantorians' advanced surveillance systems pinpointed the exact location of the Varelli's hidden base, an outpost located near the edge of the galaxy, just far enough to avoid detection by the Galactic Council. It was a well-guarded fortress, designed to keep enemies at bay and stay hidden from the prying eyes of the galaxy's higher-ups. But now, with the help of the Dantorians, Kale and Zinner had the information they needed. "We'll need to go there and confront them," Kale said. "We need to show them that they cannot dictate our future." Zinner nodded slowly. "I will gather a group of my people. They will need to know the truth, that they are not alone in this fight." The next few days were spent preparing for the mission. Kale and Zinner knew the risks. The Varelli were dangerous, and confronting them meant taking a stand that could have far-reaching consequences, but they couldn't allow fear to hold them back. They had already come so far. The hope of rebuilding the alien race, of giving them a future, was too important to abandon now. As they boarded the human ship that would take them to the Varelli outpost, Kale felt a sense of resolve he hadn't known he was capable of. The galaxy may have tried to cast aside the alien race, but humanity had shown them something different. They had shown them compassion. And now, Kale knew that this was their chance to make a real difference, to prove that when humanity sets its mind to something, nothing can stop them. The journey to the outpost was long, filled with anticipation and uncertainty. The stars outside the ship seemed to blink, as if they too were waiting for what was to come. When they finally arrived at the Varelli stronghold, Kale and Zinner took a deep breath, knowing that the time for words was over. The battle for the future of the alien race was about to begin. Kale turned to Zinner, who stood beside him. "This is our moment. We won't let them win." Zinner gave a solemn nod, his eyes burning with a renewed sense of purpose. "No, Kale, we will not." Together, they stepped off the ship and into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, Kale believed that they could truly change the galaxy, not just for humanity, but for the discarded alien race that had found hope in the most unlikely of places. The cold, distant stars seemed to watch over them as Kale and Zinner made their way toward the Varelli outpost. The atmosphere inside their ship was thick with anticipation. The journey had been long, but now they were just moments away from the confrontation. Kale could feel the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. The hope of the alien race, the sacrifices made, and the countless hours spent rebuilding. It all came down to this. "We can do this," Zinner said quietly, his voice steady but his eyes filled with determination. "We've already come so far. This is our chance to prove we are more than what the galaxy sees us as." Kale nodded. He believed in Zinner's people, and he believed in the cause. They weren't just fighting for the alien race's survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for their dignity. But as they approached the outpost, he knew that the battle ahead wouldn't be easy. The Varelli were formidable, and their intentions were clear. They wanted to crush the alien race's resurgence before it could gain any real strength. The ship touched down on the outskirts of the Varelli base, the hum of the engines fading into a tense silence. Kale and Zinner gathered a small team of the alien race's most trusted warriors and scientists, ready to confront their enemies head-on. They had no illusions about the danger they faced, but the time for fear had passed. This was about more than just surviving. This was about showing the galaxy that they would not be silenced. As they exited the ship, the harsh winds of the planet whipped through the air. The base loomed ahead, its dark, metallic walls a stark contrast to the natural beauty of the alien planet they were trying to save. It felt like stepping into enemy territory, and the oppressive energy from the Varelli base made the air feel heavier, as if the very ground beneath their feet was against them. "Stay close," Kale said to his team, his voice firm. "We don't know what we're walking into." Zinner, standing beside him, gave a small nod of agreement. They had come this far together, and there was no turning back now. They approached the entrance of the outpost cautiously, weapons drawn and their senses alert. The tension in the air was palpable, and Kel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. When they reached the front gate, it slid open without a sound, revealing the dark interior of the base. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, but there was no sign of the Varelli. Kel's instincts told him something was wrong. The silence was deafening. As they ventured deeper into the base, a voice suddenly echoed through the empty halls. "Did you really think you could succeed?" The voice was cold, laced with disdain. "You think the galaxy will welcome you back with open arms? You are nothing but a failure." Cal's hand tightened around his weapon, but he didn't answer. Zinner, on the other hand, stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "We were not here to decide, Varelli," Zinner said, his voice strong. "You may have abandoned us, but we are not your slaves. We will rise again, and we will do it without your interference." The lights in the base flickered, and suddenly, the Varelli appeared, tall, menacing figures cloaked in dark armor, their weapons drawn. Kel's heart raced, but he stood tall, ready for whatever came next. "This ends now," Kale said, his voice unwavering. The battle that followed was fierce. The Varelli were skilled warriors, but they had underestimated the resolve of Kale, Zinner, and their team. With each strike, Kale felt the weight of their mission pressing on him. This was the moment they had been fighting for. They weren't just defending their future, they were reclaiming it. In the end, the Varelli were forced to retreat. The strength of the alien race, combined with the support of humanity, had proven too much for them to overcome. As Kale and Zinner stood over the battlefield, the dust slowly settling around them, they knew that the tide had turned. The galaxy would see that the discarded alien race was no longer weak. With humanity's help, they had proven that they could rise again. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, there was hope. Real hope, that the alien race would find its place in the stars once more. As they returned to their planet, Kale looked out at the horizon. The stars no longer seemed so distant. The galaxy had witnessed a new beginning. The victory over the Varelli had been a turning point. For the first time in decades, the discarded alien race stood tall, proud of what they had accomplished. Kale and Zinner had led them through the most dangerous challenge they had faced in years, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. The Varelli had retreated, humiliated, but Kale knew the battle wasn't over. Their victory was just the beginning. Back on their homeworld, the alien race began to rebuild once more, this time with a newfound confidence. The younger generation, inspired by the bravery they had seen in Kale and Zinner, threw themselves into the work of restoring their cities, developing new technologies, and strengthening their society. Kale watched as the alien world slowly transformed from a place of ruins into one filled with life and hope. But as things began to improve, the political pressure from the Galactic Council started to grow. The other races, still wary of the reborn alien race, were beginning to question humanity's involvement. They feared that Kal's efforts would lead to the rise of a new power, one that would challenge their authority and upset the balance of power in the galaxy. One afternoon, Kale was summoned to a meeting with the Galactic Council. The Council had grown impatient with humanity's support for the discarded aliens, and it seemed that their patience had run out. Kale walked into the Grand Chamber, his heart heavy with the weight of what was about to unfold. The council members were already seated, their eyes cold and judgmental. Ambassador Tara, the representative from the Illyrians, spoke first. Kale, we have watched your actions with growing concern. Your efforts to assist this alien race, one that was abandoned for good reason, are dangerous. You are disrupting the delicate balance we have maintained in the galaxy. Kale stood tall, meeting her gaze. We helped them because they needed help. The galaxy may have abandoned them, but humanity believes in second chances. They are not a threat. They are a people who are rebuilding, just as humanity has done in the past. Ambassador Varn, the massive alien with multiple eyes, growled softly, his voice deep and menacing. You're blind, human. These creatures were abandoned for a reason. Their failures are their own. You cannot change the past, no matter how much you try. Kale felt the pressure mounting. He knew the council was not just concerned about the alien race's survival. They feared what would happen if they succeeded. They feared what would happen if the discarded aliens rose again and became a power in the galaxy. And they feared that humanity's support would shift the balance of power in favor of those who had once been left behind. Humanity will stand by them, Kale said, his voice firm. We have seen what they are capable of. They will not be a threat, but they deserve the opportunity to thrive. The galaxy's decision to abandon them was wrong, and I will not stand by and let that mistake be perpetuated. A tense silence filled the room. Kale knew the council would not back down easily, but he wasn't ready to give up. He had already invested so much, and he couldn't let their voices of doubt drown out the hope he had seen in the eyes of the alien people. Elder Kizari, the wise and ancient leader of the council, finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but filled with the weight of centuries of experience. Kale, you speak of compassion and second chances, but the galaxy is not so simple. We must consider the greater good. Can you truly say that this is the right path for the galaxy? Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the test, the moment when humanity's actions would be judged, not just by the council, but by the galaxy itself. I believe in this path, Kale said, his voice steady. I believe that helping the discarded alien race is the right thing to do. They are not the monsters the galaxy believes them to be. They are survivors, and they will not fail again. There was a long pause. The council members exchanged glances, the weight of Kale's words hanging in the air. Finally, Elder Kizari spoke again. We will deliberate further, she said, her voice soft but decisive. But understand this, human. The galaxy will not tolerate any further destruction of the balance. Your actions may have consequences. Kale nodded, knowing that this was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. The road ahead would be hard, but he would not back down. Not now, not ever. The discarded alien race had found hope, and Kale would fight for that hope, no matter the cost. As Kale left the council chamber, he knew that this was just one of many battles to come. But he also knew that humanity had made a difference, and no matter what happened next, the galaxy would never be the same again. The days following Kale's meeting with the Galactic Council were filled with uncertainty. The weight of the council's decision hung over him like a dark cloud. The tension between the races was palpable, and Kale knew that the path ahead would be difficult. The galaxy was not ready for change, and the discarded alien race was still viewed with distrust by many. Yet, despite the challenges, Kale remained resolute. He had seen the potential in the alien race, and he knew they had earned the chance to thrive. As the alien race continued to rebuild, Kale stayed by their side, working alongside them every step of the way. Zyner, the leader of the alien people, had become more determined than ever. His people were no longer hiding in the shadows, but standing tall with their heads held high. The younger generation, inspired by the success of their efforts, had taken the lead in many areas, while the older generation began to see the strength in unity rather than division. But the opposition from the galaxy's other races didn't disappear. The Galactic Council's pressure on humanity intensified. Some races saw Kal's actions as a direct challenge to their power. They feared that the alien race, now beginning to rise again, would disrupt the delicate balance of the galaxy. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about power. One evening, as Kal walked through the bustling streets of the alien city, he saw firsthand the changes that had taken place. Buildings that were once abandoned and crumbling were now being rebuilt, filled with life and energy. Children of the alien race played in the streets, their laughter echoing in the air. It was a sound Kal had never thought he would hear again. The world was healing. Zyner met him near the central square, a place that had once been a symbol of the alien race's fall. Now, it was a symbol of their rise. "You were right, Kal," Zyner said, his voice full of pride. "We are not weak. We are strong, and we will continue to grow." Kal smiled. It was a moment he would always treasure. "This is your victory, Zyner. You and your people fought for this. I only helped show you the way." As the days passed, Kal found himself caught between the struggles of the alien race and the growing pressure from the Galactic Council. He had become a symbol of defiance to some and a beacon of hope to others. The Council had made it clear that their patience was running thin. But Kal refused to back down. The alien race had earned their place, and humanity had earned their right to help. Then, one day, as Kal stood in the alien city, he received a message that would change everything. It was from the Galactic Council. "We have reconsidered." The message read, "Humanity's actions have not gone unnoticed. The alien race has proven that they are capable of rebuilding, and we acknowledge the strength they have shown. We are willing to offer them a place within the galaxy once again." Kal felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step forward. The galaxy was finally beginning to recognize what humanity had already seen, that the discarded alien race had a future, and they would rise again. With the message from the Council, Kal returned to the alien city, where Zyner and his people were celebrating their progress. As he shared the news, a cheer erupted from the crowd. The galaxy had finally accepted them, not as a failed race, but as a people who had survived and thrived. Kal looked around at the smiling faces, the hope in their eyes, and he knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had led the way, but it was the alien race that had proven their worth. Together, they had shown that even the most forgotten and discarded beings could rise above the odds and claim their place among the stars. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was a future filled with hope. And for Kal, that was all that mattered.